Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News Weekend. We begin tonight with an arrest in connection to the four-person homicide that happened last weekend in Winnipeg. Sav Jonesa reports from the scene.
An arrest has been made in a four-person homicide that took place in Winnipeg on Sunday.
Late last night, a warrant of arrest was issued for Jamie Randy Felix, 32 years, of Winnipeg, Manitoba.
Jamie Randy Felix, age 32, was taken into police custody early this morning. He is charged with 4 counts of second-degree murder and 1 count of attempt to commit murder. The deceased victims in the shooting are Crystal Beardy, Stephanie Beardy, Menelik Lasickle, and Dylan Lavalley. Another 55-year-old male remains in hospital in very critical condition. Felix is a member of Barons River First Nation. He is well known in Winnipeg as a model and actor. His twin brother, Jonathan, was murdered in 2012 in Winnipeg. Police say it's too early in the investigation to know what motivated the killings. Felix was known to police. He was on a court release, but police wouldn't say what for. There are no other suspects at this time, but police believe there may be more people connected to the murders. They are continuing their investigation and are executing a number of search warrants. Sav Jonesa, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Now, none of the charges against Jamie Randy Felix have been proven in court. Meanwhile, a sacred fire has been lit for the 2 sisters killed in that shooting. Plans are being made to lay the sisters to rest, but family members say the deaths have taken a toll on their home nation of Lake St. Martin First Nation. Tamara Pimentel has more.
Tobacco was offered while drummers gathered to honor Crystal and Stephanie Beardy. They were among 4 victims killed in a Winnipeg shooting on Sunday. Their mother, Beverly Beardy, reeling from the loss of her daughters.
Well, my sister is numb from it, It's hard for her to move and to try and move herself forward, but she has a big family that she has to keep pushing herself forward for. It's a big tragedy to all that are involved, not just my nieces. There was 3 other ones involved too.
Early Sunday morning, Winnipeg police responded to a call of 5 injured people consistent with gunshot wounds. Crystal and one of the men were pronounced deceased at the scene. Stephanie and 2 other victims were brought to hospital in critical condition. She, along with another man, succumbed to their injuries, and a 5th victim remains in critical condition. No arrests have been made, and while police told media all victims were known to police, Roberta Owen says her nieces should be remembered for having happy spirits and who are both mothers of 2.
They're not just people that got in trouble with the law. These were mothers, these were sisters, these were cousins, these were aunties. They're human just like anybody else, and they didn't deserve none of this. They have children too. They're not going to be able to parent their children now.
Lake St. Martin First Nation band councillor Brad Beardy says the community is mourning, but coming together to honor the sisters.
There's a big impact in Lake St. Martin, right? The mother, Beverly, works in our health center, and I know the ladies back home were getting things ready to do a fundraiser for the family, for the funeral cost.
The family is asking for anyone with information to come forward to bring closure. Crystal and Stephanie Beardy will be laid to rest side by side in Winnipeg. Tamara Pimentel, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
In other news, a cabin in the woods is turning out to be a flashpoint between First Nations and Métis in Northern Ontario. And Anishinabe First Nation is taking legal action against the province of Ontario and 2 members of the Métis Nation of Ontario. They say the Métis have no hunting rights in their territory. Here's Annette Francis with more.
John Turner is the 2nd chief of the Tamiogama Anishinabe. He knows the history of this territory like the back of his hand.
So when we crossed the Temagami River, we left the traditional territory of Nipissing First Nation, and we come into Indaki Manan, our homeland, Temagami Anishinaabe, and we're in the family territory of Shumshashkiwe.
So a harvesting cabin in their territory came as a surprise to Elder Alex Matthias. Matthias has been camping out here in a peaceful protest. He came across the cabin on Pond Lake 2.5 hours north of North Bay when it was still being built in 2018 and reported it to leadership.
What's going to happen if this guy gets away with it? Other people are be doing the same thing, and be cottage cabins all over our homelands, and it's just not right for somebody to do things like that. I mean, I'm a status Indian. I can't go and build in Lake Nipissing.
Leadership tried to contact the Decotu brothers about the build, but got no response. Councillor Kim Montry also questions how this happened.
Ontario government MNR knows there's no Métis community here. There's no Métis people. They've been dealing with us for 100 and some years. Since 1850, we've been trying to settle our land claim. It's still all outstanding.
In 2017, Ontario and the Métis Nation of Ontario recognized 6 new Métis communities. 2 of them, Abitibi and Mattawa, claimed harvesting rights in their territory called Dekimanan. In addition to the protests, they began legal action challenging the Ontario Métis harvesting agreements and the assertion of MNO rights in their homeland. According to their statement of claim filed on November 20th, the Métis harvesting agreement and the Pond Lake cabin infringe on the Temagami First Nation's inherent and constitutionally protected rights and undermine the Temagami's jurisdiction over Dekimanan.
This notion that an Indigenous group that we're unaware of can exercise rights in our territory, well, that doesn't make any sense to us at all, and so it was pretty clear, because MNR was digging in their heels on this, that we have to go to court to make that case.
Temagami First Nation Chief Shelley Moore-Frappé says the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry has allowed the Métis to assert rights where historically there were never any Métis people. Moore-Frappé says what's even more concerning is how this whole issue connects with Bill C-53, the Métis Self-Government Act.
A major concern is the identity fraud that is happening, using our ancestors as their ancestors. So that is highly problematic. And as we can see right now, this is about land. I know that their president, Margaret Froh, keeps on speaking about how this is not about land, but as you can see today, that this is absolutely about land.
The Temagami statement of claim is asking for an injunction to stop the Decotus from using the Pond Lake cabin. APTN News contacted the Métis of Ontario. It responded with the same written statement it sent to media in September. The MNO stands by the Métis communities we represent and the recognition of their harvesting rights. The Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry has a process to allow the establishment of incidental cabins, and that the MNO is undergoing an internal review to determine if the structure meets that requirement. Meanwhile, the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry has not responded to our request for comment by airtime. Annette Francis, APTN National News, Ottawa.
Meanwhile, over in Ottawa, Crown Indigenous Relations Minister Gary Ananda Sangari was on the hot seat Thursday as he answered questions from the Indigenous Affairs Committee on the government's controversial Bill C-53. The proposed legislation recognizes Métis Nation governments in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Ontario, but a number of First Nations in Ontario have taken issue with the recognition of the MNO, which they do not see as legitimate and say could affect their inherent treaty rights. Here's what Ananda Sangari had to say about what the legislation does not mean.
This legislation does not deal with harvesting rights, and it does not deal with land-related rights, nor will the self-government treaties of MNO, MNS, and MNA that are contemplated to have either harvesting or land use rights. The proposed legislation would only impact those who have elected to be citizens of the Métis governments.
We are just days away from the election of a new national chief of the Assembly of First Nations. More on that coming up after the break. Welcome back to APTN National News Weekend. Leadership from First Nations in Manitoba came to meet the possible future national chief this past week. Here's Sav Jonesa with more.
All 6 candidates running for Assembly of First Nations National Chief spoke at a forum held in Winnipeg today. Chiefs across Manitoba attended to hear their platforms and ask where each candidate stood on important issues. Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs Grand Chief Kathy Merrick was at the forum. She told APTN what she's looking for with her vote.
Somebody that will be able to bring all our nations together. We've been very divided in terms of the Assembly of First Nations. So the National Chief should be able to do that and should be able to speak about inherent and treaty rights, which are very important to our people.
Each candidate had 5 minutes to share their platform prior to the question period. Cindy Woodhouse says the next national chief needs a stronger voice federally.
They're always trying to push legislation on us. And that's fine, but talk to us first and make sure that it's actually co-developed and drafted with us in a good way.
Sheila North says the next AFN chief must make the organization relevant again.
I will bring back the organization that respects your treaty sovereignty, that stands up with you when you need to fight. I'll step aside when you need me to, but I'll speak up when I need to.
Dean Sayers had a focus on inherent rights.
We never gave up the right to manage the water. We never gave up the right to manage the forest. Those are our relatives. We never gave up those obligations.
Reginald Belrose's key priority was remote First Nations.
You should not be funded as Southern First Nations are. You have differences. That needs to be reflected in your funding when it comes to housing, mental health.
Craig Mackinac wants to get back to the original intent of the AFN.
We don't need the government to tell us what to do. We just got to follow through on what our elders tell us, and we just got to exercise our treaty inherent rights.
David Pratt believes the government took advantage of AFN's vacuum leadership.
What I propose to do when I'm national chief is to bring back that strong voice to the organization. Give the chiefs a voice around the table. You're the ones the organization was established for, chiefs.
Merrick says regardless of the outcome, it was nice to have everyone together. The AFN election is being held on December 6th. Sav Jonesa, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Further west now, Treaty 8 First Nations of Alberta have filed a class action lawsuit against the federal government and the province of Alberta. Chiefs say that these children's special allowance benefit paid from Canada to Alberta for children off reserve and care of the province was never spent on the children. APTN's Chris Stewart has more.
Chiefs and lawyers representing Treaty 8 First Nations of Alberta held a press conference in Edmonton announcing the class action lawsuit. Treaty 8 Grand Chief Arthur Noski told those gathered that Alberta's child welfare system has failed.
Alberta Children's Services legislation has the same effects as the residential schools. Our children and families are broken. We as First Nations need to develop our child well-being laws and bring our children home.
The federal government pays between $520 and $620 per month for each child in care of the province who live off reserve. According to the chiefs, those funds have been put into Alberta's general revenues instead of helping the children in care. Manitoba lost a similar suit in 2022.
In this case, the denial has adverse impact Indigenous children in care, disabled children in care in their disadvantage. The court in Manitoba was clear that it does not matter that the government may not have intended discrimination against our children. What matters is that the result of the policy, children in care did not have access to the CSA benefit to pay their expenditures that may assist at-risk youth with homelessness and lack of clothing.
Lawyers for Treaty 8 First Nations say the money was stolen from children in care who desperately needed it. The statement of claim says these funds have not been used to help children in Alberta since 1993. Last year, the amount given by the federal government was $33 million.
We call on Alberta and Canada to do the right thing here. Return the money. Theft is illegal in this country, and no one is above the law. including the province of Alberta.
Grand Chief Arthur Noski says paying what is owed would be a step towards true reconciliation.
There's a whole bunch of hot air out there on reconciliation. Well, this is how you fix stuff. It's just all talk. So until we have a government that's in place, not basically looking at the flaws of the previous government, but looking to make amends to the First Nations people, I think then we'll gain some leeway into the word reconciliation.
The class action still needs certification to continue. Chris Stewart, APTN National News, Edmonton.
Ashley Barrett, the press secretary for the Office of the Minister of Children and Family Services, emailed APTN News saying as the matter is before the courts, it would be inappropriate to comment. The federal housing advocate released a report on Inuit housing in Nunatsiavut and Nunavut on Monday morning. The report finds overcrowding and substandard conditions are causing both physical and mental health problems. APTN's Fraser Needham has that story.
I heard and saw very
At a press conference in Ottawa, Canada's housing advocate Marie-Josée Houle says most Canadians would be horrified if they were to witness the deplorable housing conditions in these areas.
And this takes a serious toll on people's physical, mental, and emotional health. Youth I met with shared how overcrowding negatively impacts their mental health and well-being. And for people in the south of Canada who will never have the opportunity to see these communities, I'm talking about families with sometimes up to 18 people living in a 3-bedroom home the size of a 1-story World War II house.
Houle traveled to Nunatsiavut and Nunavut in October 2022, and her report makes a number of recommendations, including transferring jurisdiction over Inuit housing to Inuit governments, the recognition of housing as a human right by all levels of government, and the creation of an independent Inuit housing advocate or ombudsperson.
To the housing crisis.
Johannes Lamp of Nunatsiavut Kevamanga says sadly what is in the report is nothing new to the Inuit people who have been living it.
That we have a critical housing shortage of every type, overcrowding and related health consequences like tuberculosis, housing conditions that are so awful they need to be seen to be believed. These are all symptoms of a human rights crisis that has gone on for far too long.
Aluki Kodiak of Nunavut Tungavik says what is new is the federal housing advocate filing a report on Inuit housing conditions, and she hopes this leads to substantive changes.
The establishment of a federal housing advocate is new. A report coming out from the federal housing advocate is new. I hope it ignites a refocus on how to address the Inuit housing crisis across this country. We need transformative change.
The report will now go to Federal Housing Minister Sean Fraser's office for consideration. Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
An elder from northern BC has taken the leap of a lifetime. That story is coming up after the break. Welcome back to APTN National News Weekend. 2 Manitoba cabinet ministers were honored last weekend after becoming the first First Nations women to be appointed to the provincial cabinet. Bernadette Smith, Minister of Housing, Addictions and Homelessness, and Families Minister Nahani Fontaine were given eagle feathers and star blankets during the ceremony. Members of the Indigenous community and other politicians were in attendance. Both Fontaine and Smith are advocates of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. They were sworn in with Premier Wab Kinew and the rest of his government on October 18th.
Never did I ever think that this would be something that I would ever see in my lifetime, let alone, seeing my sister and I here today.
Turning now to an inspiring story out of Auckland, New Zealand, where an elder from northern BC visiting in the Kiwi state recently completed his very first skydive. Sarah Connors has the story on how he's proving age is just a number.
Jerry Porter is living proof the sky really is the limit. On Tuesday, the Casca elder from Lower Post, BC, fulfilled a lifelong dream in Auckland, New Zealand.
The instruction was perfect. I did that all, and it was just coming out of the plane when you're just free falling and you see it just going down.
It's nothing new for the adventure seeker. In 2018, the then 57-year-old bungee jumped off the Auckland Harbour Bridge, a 40-meter plunge into the Waitemata Harbour.
Because I went backwards, and I didn't know if I made it till I hit the water when I got some salt water up my nose and in my ears. I know I made it.
Now, the 62-year-old says he's truly living a dream. For decades, Porter struggled with alcoholism. His addiction led him to be estranged from his wife and children, who are Maori from New Zealand. They've since reconnected and inspired him to embark on a sobriety journey.
I'm doing what I want to do is to be sober and be the best grandpa around.
Everybody, comes Jerry in 3, 2, 1, go! Have fun!
Now 3 years sober, Porter says life is better than ever. In the last year, he jumped 200 meters off the Auckland Sky Tower, sailed from Australia to New Zealand on a Disney cruise, and guided extended family on a sheep hunt in northern BC.
I just wanted, as soon as I got sober, I wanted to try different things when I'm sober, not half drunk and you're brave and you want to do it.
Everybody, comes Jerry in 3, 2, 1, go!
An elder in age, it's his love for adventure that keeps him young at heart. Sarah Connors, APTN National News, Whitehorse.
Great story. You're a real inspiration, Jerry. Love seeing that. That's all the time we have for your APTN National News for this weekend. Of course, for news anytime, you can visit our website. That's aptnnews.ca. You can also find much more over on our APTN News YouTube page. I'm Dennis Ward. Marcy Miigwech, thanks for being with us. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.